Guess what was in the news today?
I don't know. What was in the news today?
Earthquakes, serial killers, civil war, and disease.
Gee, that sounds terrible.
Well, it just raises that old question again. If God is good, how could there be so much suffering in the world?
That's a tough question, all right.
Well, you call yourself a Christian. Do you have an answer for it?
I don't have anything new or innovative, I suppose. Are you familiar with some of the existing answers?
Which ones?
That if every evil action were prohibited, there would be no free will, and thus no love. Or that evil is the absence of good, and that without evil there could be no good. Or that our recognition of evil as being evil is evidence of the real existence of a moral law. Or that suffering is necessary for the full development of the soul. Or that Satan, not God, causes evil. Or that man, not God, causes evil. Or that without any suffering, life would be boring.
I've heard most of these before. That last one sounds particularly absurd. Without suffering, life would be boring.
To an extent, I think it is true. If everything always went perfectly, we could not fully savor the good times. The point is illustrated very well in a Twilight Zone episode called A Nice Place to Visit.
I never saw that one.
Well, I won't spoil it for you then. Look it up online if you must know the plot.
Fine. But really, do you find any of these arguments about why a good God allows suffering to exist to be persuasive?
Sort of. I mean, I can see how free will and the potential for love go hand in hand with the potential for suffering.
But why does there have to be so much suffering, often of such terrible intensity too?
Indeed, I wonder that myself. I admit that even after considering all the philosophical points, it does seem to me like God could have achieved all of the alleged benefits of allowing some suffering, by allowing maybe 5% of the massive amount of suffering that exists, maybe less than that.
So isn't that a strong argument against God's existence?
Not really. I suppose it's an argument against God being good in the same way Santa Claus is good. But it doesn't rule out God being a loving father. Parents often do things that children find unpleasant, in ways that children see as bad but are for their long-term benefit.
Still, you admit that even if God is a loving father, there is a lot more suffering than one would expect.
Sure. But the question of why there is so much suffering is even harder to answer if there is no God at all.
How so?
Well, suppose one follows the most popular form of atheism. That nothing exists outside of what can in principle be explained by natural science, and that man is essentially a biochemical machine produced by a random evolutionary process, and nothing more. Is that what you believe?
Yes, basically.
Well then, how do you explain any suffering at all?
Man just follows his animal instincts for food and shelter and procreation. These things manifest as various evils in a civilized society, but are ultimately all products of man's biology. Survival of the fittest produces competition, and competition leads to suffering.
But where in all of that is there room for such a thing as a soul that can experience the suffering, or joy for that matter? Your model portrays us as a whole bunch of machines roaming the planet. Does your laptop computer experience joy or suffering?
I see your point. I guess nobody has an answer to that. Maybe someday science will figure it out.
I don't see how it can, even in principle. How does one get from chemical raw material into a human soul? I see how evolution can perhaps get all the way to a body, maybe even a brain, maybe even something that walks and talks and behaves like a human. But not something that has an inner life. I can observe my own soul directly, even if it cannot be seen with scientific instruments. I can't explain why it's there or how it interacts with the brain. The only way I can make any sense of it is to consider it a gift from something higher than me, something that itself is soul and mind. God certainly fits the description.
Okay, But what if Christianity and atheism are both wrong? What if there is a God but he's not good? Or what if there are multiple gods, some good, some bad?
Do you believe that?
No.
Do you know anyone who believes that?
Not personally, but there are people in parts of the world who do.
But is anyone out there trying to make a serious intellectual case for polytheism being really true, as opposed to just being a metaphor or a tradition? Is anyone trying to defend polytheism in the same kind of debates that you and I are having?
Not really, I suppose.
And is anyone making serious arguments for belief in a God who is evil or somewhat evil?
I haven't heard any.
Probably for good reason. I suspect the whole idea of God and the whole idea of good are bound up with one another. In the sense that people say God is good, it's almost a tautology. The whole idea of good is not really found in nature. Nature just is what it is, it doesn't have good and bad. Yet most of us, even atheists, judge things good or bad, and consider such judgments to go beyond a simple matter of taste. Murder, for example, is wrong. It's not just a neutral thing that happens to be distasteful for me and appealing to a murderer.
Still, you must admit that having a bad God and a good God would explain more of what we see than just having a good God.
I see your point, but I think there is some parallel for it within Christianity.
How so?
Well, Christians believe that God is good and Satan is bad. Satan is not a second God, he's the created being too. But he causes a lot of the evil.
How can you really believe Satan exists? Because of the serpent in Genesis. Please tell me you don't take Genesis literally.
Well, I don't take Genesis literally. But Satan was mentioned by Jesus himself. There isn't a lot of detail about what he is like, other than that he has our worst interests at heart and we should be on guard. I suppose we know as much as we need to know for the time being. Now, some Christians take even Jesus' descriptions of Satan allegorically, and perhaps they are right. But personally, I do believe Satan literally exists. I think it would explain a lot.
How so? If God created Satan, and Satan causes evil, then God is still responsible indirectly for the evil that exists.
Agreed, but just bringing Satan into the story opens up a lot of possibilities. There could be all sorts of drama going on between God and Satan to which we are not privy. He may have been given free will and some kind of dominion over man, both of which he has abused. It's harder to know whether the quantity of suffering in the world is reasonable if there is more going on than just what's in this world.
Sounds awfully speculative to me.
Yes, and to me too. But that's all we can do in the face of questions like the mystery of suffering. We see life as it is and we try to fit an understanding of it to the facts. Some speculation is part of that. Questions like the problem of evil don't have easy answers whether God exists or does not. I am a Christian because it makes more sense of the world than anything else,